Moving into this neighborhood was supposed to be my fresh start. I imagined peace, the soft whisper of leaves against my windows, the quiet promise of mornings with coffee on the porch. After years of city chaos, I thought I had finally escaped the constant noise. But peace didn't live here. No. Here it belonged to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the kind of neighbor whose heels click like a warning bell and whose sunglasses reflect your own frustration right back at you. And she decided, for reasons I still can't comprehend, that my pride and joy, the lush hedge I'd spent years nurturing, was her personal racetrack. The first time I saw it, the crushed branches, the leaves strewn across my lawn like green confetti, my stomach knotted. I told myself it was an accident. People make mistakes. But when it happened again and again, the truth settled in. Karen wasn't careless. She was deliberate. Every tire mark felt like a signature of disrespect. I swallowed my anger and approached her with the patience of someone who still believes in civility. "Karen," I said, voice steady, "my hedge is on my property. Could you please avoid driving over it?" Her smirk was sharp enough to cut me in half. She slid her sunglasses down just far enough to meet my eyes and said, "Oh, honey, if it's in the way, maybe you should have planted something sturdier." Then she walked away. I stood there, jaw locked, tasting the metallic edge of rage in the back of my throat. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the first spark of a fire that would consume everything she thought she controlled. I tried the proper channels. Photographs, tire tracks, carefully worded complaints to the HOA. Surely they would see the truth. Property damage is property damage, right? But 2 days later, the letter came. Not a warning for Karen, a warning for me. Please ensure your landscaping does not obstruct common areas. I read it 3 times in disbelief. My hedge was fully on my property, yet somehow I was the problem. I marched to the HOA president's home, my pulse hammering. He answered with a look of perpetual panic, as though every conversation might end his career. "Well, Karen, raised some concerns," he stammered. "Maybe you should consider an alternative hedge?" His words blurred into the background. Hum of injustice. Alternative hedge? Was I supposed to pave over my own yard because she couldn't keep her SUV on the street? That was the moment I realized the ugly truth. Reason wouldn't save me. The HOA wouldn't save me. If I wanted peace, I'd have to take it. I caught her in the act one late afternoon, sunlight flashing against her chrome as she rolled casually over the hedge again. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply crossed my arms and said, "Karen, this is the last time I'm asking nicely." Her response was a laugh, rich, condescending, echoing down the street like a villain in a soap opera. "Sweetie," she said, "I don't have time for your little gardening problems." Then, for good measure, she gunned the engine and tore more branches from the earth before peeling away. Dust clung to my shirt. Gasoline fumes burned my nose. And something inside me hardened. There are moments in life when patience dies and something sharper takes its place. That was mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the mutilated remains of my hedge, and an idea began to take root. It started as a whisper, a delicious, dangerous whisper, and grew into a plan. If Karen wanted to keep playing this game, I would play to win. I spent the next week in quiet preparation. I consulted a landscaping friend. I studied HOA bylaws with the cold focus of a lawyer preparing for trial, and slowly, carefully, I began building my masterpiece. My new hedge looked soft, green, harmless, but beneath the leaves was steel, reinforced with rebar, iron rods, buried deep into the soil, angled to do one thing: make her regret underestimating me. To the casual eye, it was just my hedge restored. To Karen's SUV, it would be the end of the road. The day of reckoning arrived with the casual arrogance of routine. I saw her coming before she saw me. Sunglasses on, phone in hand, her SUV gliding down the street like a predator certain of its prey. She didn't slow down. Why would she? She'd done this a dozen times. Then, contact. A crunch like metal chewing metal, followed by the sharp, echoing hiss of air exploding from tires. Her SUV lurched, the undercarriage grinding violently on the hidden reinforcements, a metallic scream splitting the air. Birds shot from the trees. Her front end dipped as airbags detonated in a suffocating white cloud. For a moment, the world was silent except for the hiss of betrayal. Her own car turning against her. She emerged like a storm. Hair wild, face red, her voice climbing to a pitch that seemed to make the air itself wince. You did this!" she shrieked, pointing at me as I strolled onto the porch with a mug of coffee and the most innocent tilt of my head. "Oh, no," I said lightly. "Karen, what happened? Did you hit something?" The neighbors began to gather, drawn by the chaos. I saw it in their faces, the glee of people who had been quietly suffering for years, finally seeing the scales of justice tilt. She ranted, she foamed, she promised vengeance. And for the first time in her reign of terror, no one rushed to defend her. The HOA representative arrived, clipboard clutched like a shield. One look at the wreck, then at Karen, and the sigh that followed carried years of suppressed frustration. "Karen," she said flatly, "this is the third reckless driving complaint this month. Maybe stay on the road." Gasps and muffled chuckles rippled through the crowd. I lifted my phone casually. "I have the whole thing on video, just in case anyone wants to see what really happened." Karen froze. All the blood seemed to drain from her face. She knew it was over. No spin, no escape. Just the truth, recorded and undeniable. The aftermath was pure poetry. Her screams turned to sputters. Her threats dissolved into desperate stammers. The HOA official didn't even look at her anymore. She looked at me. "Please send us the footage," she said. I smiled. "Of course. I'll send it to her insurance company, too." Karen's knees almost buckled. She fled in a slow, humiliating crawl of a retreat, her once pristine SUV groaning and leaking fluids as it limped away. The moment she turned the corner, the neighborhood erupted in relieved laughter. Years of tension released in a single wave. An elderly neighbor clapped me on the shoulder. "She had it coming," he said with a grin. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Homeowners came forward with stories of her cruelty and petty fines. The HOA could no longer shield her. Within a month, she was voted off the board. Within 2, the house went up for sale. And one quiet morning, just like that, Karen was gone. My hedge flourished again, a wall of vibrant green, stronger than ever, like a living monument to justice. Sometimes I sit on my porch with my coffee, look at that hedge and smile, because sometimes life doesn't need you to be loud. Sometimes it just needs you to be patient, prepared, and a little bit creative. And every so often, I think back to that moment. Karen frozen in the street, surrounded by neighbors who had finally seen her for who she was. In that silence, as the dust settled and her SUV sagged in defeat, I realized something. Dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. And when the time comes, it only needs one moment to stand tall and never be driven over again. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. My coffee didn't taste like coffee. It tasted like defeat. I stepped outside hoping maybe, just maybe, the world had pressed the reset button overnight. But the first thing I saw was the hedge, my hedge, lying there like a crime scene, crushed branches, torn leaves, mud smeared in ugly tire patterns. It wasn't just a hedge anymore. It was a reminder that in this neighborhood, I had no power. For a moment, I just stood there in my slippers, staring at the ruin. I thought about all the weekends I'd spent nurturing it, watering it, trimming it, shaping it until it was a perfect green wall between me and the world. It wasn't just landscaping. It was a piece of my peace. And Karen had run right over it without a second thought. I'd already confronted her once. I'd been calm, polite, reasonable, and she'd laughed in my face. I'd filed a complaint with the HOA, expecting, naively, that they would see reason. That justice would be blind, or at least slightly farsighted in my favor. But instead, I got a letter. Not a letter supporting me, not even a neutral acknowledgement. No, it was a warning, to me, about my own hedge. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter, reading it over and over again, trying to make the words mean something else. Please ensure your landscaping does not obstruct common areas. I could practically hear Karen's voice behind the print. That smug, syrupy tone. Oh, honey, maybe plant something sturdier. My jaw locked. My pulse hammered. A part of me wanted to march right over to her front door and demand an apology. Another part wanted to grab a shovel and rip the hedge out, myself, just to stop feeling like I was losing a battle on my own lawn. But a quieter voice, somewhere deep inside, said something different. No, not yet. Wait. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every interaction with Karen, the way she strutted down the street in those expensive heels, the way she treated every neighbor like a character in a show she directed. And I realized she wasn't just entitled, she was untouchable. The HOA was her shield, her sword, her stage. And if I didn't change the script, I'd be the neighborhood's punchline forever. The next afternoon, I got my chance. I was watering the lawn when I heard the familiar hum of her SUV approaching. I froze. There she was, queen of the cul-de-sac, sunglasses gleaming, one hand lazily on the wheel, the other holding her phone. She didn't even look at my hedge as she rolled onto my property and over the branches like they were nothing. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Water dripped from the hose onto the grass. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't wave my arms. I just said evenly, Karen, this is the last time I'm asking nicely. She hit the brakes just long enough to throw her head back and laugh. Not a chuckle, a laugh. The kind that says, I own this place, and you are just a guest in my world. Sweetie, she said, I don't have time for your little gardening problems. Maybe plant something sturdier next time. Then she revved the engine and spun her tires, grinding more leaves into the dirt before peeling away in a cloud of dust and gasoline. I stood there with my fists clenched, the garden hose hissing softly in my hand. And in that moment, something broke, and something else began to grow. Reason wasn't going to work. HOA wasn't going to help. Karen wasn't going to stop. If I wanted my peace back, I'd have to take it. That night, I sat at my table with a pad of paper and a pen, and I started to draw. Not flowers, not hedges, plans, a blueprint for justice. My first thought was simple: install cameras, catch her in the act. But I already knew how that would play out. Even if I had video, the HOA would twist it. They'd find some rule, some loophole, some common area nonsense to protect their queen. No, cameras wouldn't be enough. I needed something she couldn't ignore. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. Something that would make her feel what I'd been feeling. For weeks, powerless, humiliated, exposed. I needed to turn my hedge into a trap. The idea started small. Then it grew. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. A plan that was brilliant, a little devious, and, most importantly, completely legal. Step 1. Rebuild the hedge. Make it beautiful, lush, inviting, a soft green wall just begging to be flattened. Step 2. Hide the real secret inside. I spent the next week preparing. I visited hardware stores, landscaping supply shops, even called an old friend who worked construction. Piece by piece, my vision took shape. Beneath the leaves, I built a skeleton of steel and rebar. Iron rods angled just right, buried deep enough to hold their ground. To anyone walking by, it was just a hedge. To Karen's SUV, it would be a nightmare. I was meticulous. Every branch placed to hide the reinforcements. Every support anchored so it wouldn't shift under impact. I even installed a small motion-activated camera, perfectly positioned to capture the moment of truth. Because when this worked, I wanted evidence. Not just for the HOA, not just for insurance, but for me. For the satisfaction of knowing I'd turned the tables in a way she'd never see coming. By the end of the week, my yard was perfect again. Green, peaceful, innocent. I watered it that evening and couldn't help but smile. Karen would never resist. 3 days later, I saw her coming. Afternoon sun bouncing off her windshield, sunglasses, phone, that same casual arrogance. She didn't slow down. She didn't even glance at the hedge. She swerved off the road, tires crunching against the leaves like always. Then it happened. Sound like the world snapping in half. A metallic crunch, followed by the vicious hiss of air escaping. Her SUV lurched forward and tilted as the front tires blew out in unison. The undercarriage screamed against steel, sparks dancing for a brief, glorious moment. And then, poof, her airbags detonated, a white cloud swallowing her in a puff of instant karma. For a heartbeat, the street was silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Then came the scream. She threw the driver's door open and stumbled out. Hair a mess, face twisted in rage and disbelief. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me as I stepped casually onto my porch, coffee in hand. "You did this!" I tilted my head and let the smallest smile play at my lips. "Oh, no, Karen, what happened? Did you hit something?" She was a storm in designer shoes. Her hair was wild, her face blotched red, and her voice sliced through the quiet street. "You!" she screamed, her finger trembling as if it wanted to leap off her hand and strangle me. "You did this. You're going to pay for this." I just sipped my coffee. The steam curled up into the afternoon light. Calm, controlled. Because for the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tip. "Oh, Karen," I said softly, like I was talking to a child who had scraped her knee. "What happened? Did you hit something?" Her mouth opened wide enough to swallow her own rage. She was about to let loose, but the first of the neighbors started to appear. Doors creaked open, feet shuffled across driveways, heads peeked out from behind hedges and windows, and there she was, the queen of the cul-de-sac. Not on her throne this time, but standing next to a car that sagged like a defeated beast. 2 front tires gone, a faint wisp of smoke curling from the wheel well. Fluid dripping in a slow, humiliating puddle onto the asphalt. The neighborhood was watching. She spun around to them, desperate to reclaim her crown. "Did you see this? He sabotaged me. He set a trap. This is illegal." But the street stayed quiet. A breeze pushed a single leaf across the road. Then from the end of the cul-de-sac, a low chuckle broke the silence. It was Mr. Callahan. 80 years old, retired Army, the kind of man who'd seen too much to be impressed by HOA politics. He leaned on his cane, eyes glinting with a kind of satisfaction that only comes after years of silent suffering. "Funny," he said, voice gravelly. "I've been watching you drive over that man's hedge for months. Can't drive on the road like the rest of us, huh?" Karen's head whipped toward him. "Shut up, old man! He's trying to kill me!" But now the whispers were spreading. People murmured to each other. Some smiled. Some just crossed their arms and watched. Because for the first time, Karen wasn't untouchable. She was exposed. She stomped toward me, heels clacking on the pavement like a metronome of rage. "You are going to regret this," she spat. "I am calling the HOA. I am calling the police. I will—" "Karen," I said, holding up my phone and tapping the screen once. The soft beep of the camera playback filled the air. "You might want to wait on that call. I've got the whole thing on video." She froze. Her eyes darted to the phone, then to the hedge, then to the crowd. The tiniest flicker of doubt crossed her face, and for the first time I saw something I'd never seen in Karen before. Fear. You can't do that. It's illegal to record me without my permission." I raised an eyebrow. "On my own property, while you're trespassing and destroying it? I think my lawyer might see it differently." The whispers turned into chuckles. Someone snorted. Another person whispered, "Oh, she's done for." Karen's face was a battlefield. Rage, panic, humiliation, all warring for control. She turned to the neighbors, desperate for backup. But none came. Her army was gone. Her kingdom, crumbling. And then came the distant squeal of tires. A silver sedan rolled up the street and parked awkwardly by the curb. Out stepped a woman with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. the HOA representative. Her expression was already weary, the look of someone who had spent too many hours managing adult tantrums. She took one long look at the scene, the wrecked SUV, the intact Hedge, the gathered neighbors. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled, and let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire neighborhood. "Karen," she said finally, her voice low, tired, and edged with irritation. "This is the third reckless driving incident this month." Karen's jaw dropped. What? You're not taking his side, are you? He set a trap for me." The HOA woman didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed locked on Karen. "Maybe, just maybe, if you stayed on the road, this wouldn't have happened." It was like watching a balloon deflate. Karen staggered back, mouth opening and closing like a fish, searching for a line that would save her. But no one spoke up for her. Not the neighbors. Not the HOA. Not even the universe, which had finally decided it was done humoring her arrogance. And in that moment, I felt something settle over the street. Not triumph exactly, but balance. For the first time since I'd moved here, Karen wasn't the one holding all the cards. The street was frozen in that strange, perfect silence that comes right after a storm. Only the storm was standing in stilettos in front of a wrecked SUV, face twisted with disbelief. Karen's eyes darted wildly between the HOA rep, the neighbors, and me. Her hands trembled as she pointed at the hedge like it had personally betrayed her. You can't just let him do this to me. This is sabotage. This is illegal. I'll have him arrested." The HOA rep tilted her head slightly, as though the weight of Karen's absurdity had finally grown too heavy to bear. "Karen," she said, her voice sharp now, "we have multiple complaints about your driving, witnesses, videos. This is your third violation. The board has already discussed suspending your privileges." That last word, suspending, hit Karen like a slap. "My privileges?" she squeaked, the pitch of her voice wobbling. "I am the HOA. You can't suspend me." From the yow back of the crowd, someone snorted. Then another neighbor muttered just loud enough for the group to hear, "Not anymore, you're not." A ripple of laughter moved through the street like a tiny earthquake. Karen spun on her heels, desperate for allies, but all she saw were crossed arms and raised eyebrows. The same people she had terrorized for years, sending passive-aggressive letters about lawn heights, issuing fines for wind chimes, even complaining about the wrong shade of beige on someone's shutters. They were all here, and they weren't with her anymore. Her lips quivered. This is harassment. I'll sue all of you. But the threat fell apart before it even left her mouth. I leaned against my porch railing, still holding my coffee, and let the smallest smile tug at my lips. "Karen," I said calmly, "before you go down that road, you might want to see this." I turned my phone screen to her. There, in perfect HD clarity, was the moment her SUV swerved off the road, the instant the tires hit the hedge, the glorious crunch of her luxury car meeting my reinforced wall of greenery. The motion-activated camera had caught everything. Karen's eyes locked on the screen, and for a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. Her face went through an entire spectrum of emotion: disbelief, anger, humiliation, and then that tiny flicker of fear again. You can't," she stammered. "Perfectly legal," I said, my voice soft, calm, surgical. "On my own property, capturing evidence of trespassing. Your insurance company's going to love this footage." The neighbors laughed again, louder this time. A few even clapped. Mrs. Calloway, the sweet older woman from down the street, cupped her hands to her mouth and said, "Finally, some justice." Karen whipped around, her voice cracking. "This isn't fair. He set me up. He made me do it." The HOA rep pinched the bridge of her nose like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Karen," she said in that firm, no-nonsense tone that teachers use on unruly kids, "enough." That one word was like a thunderclap. Karen froze. She wasn't, Used to that word being directed at her? Not here, not in her kingdom. You are personally liable for your car, the HOA rep continued, and for any damage caused on his property. If he files a formal complaint, the board will have to fine you. And given your record, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like the last nail in a coffin. Karen's bravado deflated in real time. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes flicked back to her SUV. 2 tires shredded, undercarriage dripping, a white airbag still flopping out like a tongue in defeat. This wasn't just about the car. This was about her throne collapsing in front of her subjects. I took a sip of coffee and let the moment breathe. Then, softly, I added, I'll be sending a copy of this footage to your insurance company and to the HOA, just in case anyone needs to see what really happened. Karen's mouth opened like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She spun back toward her car, slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, and cranked the engine. The tires, or what was left of them, gave a pitiful screech as she limped down the street at 5 miles an hour, leaving a faint trail of leaking fluid behind her. The second she turned the corner, the tension snapped like a rubber band. The whole street erupted. Some people laughed openly, others clapped me on the back. Whispers of, "She finally got what she deserved," and "I wish I'd filmed that," buzzed around like happy little bees. Mrs. Calloway waddled up to my porch, eyes twinkling. "You planned that, didn't you?" I shrugged, playing innocent. "I just reinforced my property. If she decided to destroy her own car, well, that's her choice." She chuckled, a warm, conspiratorial sound. "Whatever you did, thank you. She's made this neighborhood miserable for years. Maybe now the HOA will finally see what kind of monster they've been protecting." I smiled. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. No, she was going to fight. But she'd made one fatal mistake. She had finally given the neighborhood something they'd never had before. Proof, and proof has a way of spreading faster than any rumor ever could. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. The air was lighter, the street quieter, almost like the block itself had exhaled after holding its breath for years. For the first time since moving here, I walked out to get my mail and didn't feel the tightness in my chest. No scowling neighbor, no silent judgment. Just sunlight, birdsong, and the faint, glorious memory of a deflated airbag. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the kind of person who would take her loss quietly. People like her never do. They build their identities on control, on intimidation. And when that crumbles, they thrash like a fish on a dock, desperate for water that's never coming back. I didn't have to wait long for the thrashing to start. By mid-morning, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" I answered. A sharp voice snapped back. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "Karen." "Of course." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the sunlight spilling across my floor. "Karen," I said pleasantly. "How are the tires?" Her voice cracked like glass. "I hope you know I'm calling the police, and the HOA, and my insurance company. I'll have you arrested for... Her words stumbled over themselves, searching for a crime that didn't exist. "Recording you trespassing on my property?" I said lightly. "Or reinforcing my hedge on my own land? Go ahead. I'll wait." For a second, all I heard was her ragged breathing. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down and smiled. It wasn't gloating. Well, maybe a little, but it was the smile of someone who had finally taken back what was theirs. Later that day, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel it. The shift in the air. For months, maybe years, Karen had been the sun everyone orbited. People whispered about her, tiptoed around her, tried not to get burned. But now she was just a smoldering ember, and the neighborhood was warming up to life without her shadow. Mr. Callahan waved at me from his porch. "Heard she's been making calls all morning," he said, his voice rough but amused. "Insurance. Company. HOA. Even the cops. No one's biting." "Yeah?" I asked. He nodded. "Cops told her it's a civil matter. Insurance wants the footage. HOA's... well..." He chuckled. "They're tired of her. We all are. For the first time, I saw it clearly. My trap hadn't just punctured her tires. It had punctured her reign. The proof I had, the video, the witnesses, wasn't just protection for me. It was a weapon. And it was already doing the work without me lifting a finger. The next HOA meeting came faster than usual, a special session. I knew what that meant. I walked into the community clubhouse that evening, and the air was electric. Every folding chair was filled. Neighbors leaned against the walls, murmuring. People who had never attended before were here now, their curiosity buzzing like bees. And there, near the front, was Karen. She didn't look like the queen of the cul-de-sac anymore. Her hair was perfect, her clothes sharp as always, but her posture betrayed her, shoulders tight, eyes twitching at every whisper. She clutched a stack of papers like they were a shield against the truth. The HOA president, a man who always seemed one complaint away from fainting, cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. We need to discuss the recent incident on Maple Grove Lane. Dozens of eyes turned to me, and then to Karen. She leapt to her feet. He tried to kill me, she shrieked, the words bouncing off the beige walls. He booby-trapped his yard. He engineered this to destroy my car and humiliate me. Gasps rippled through the room, but not the kind she wanted. These weren't gasps of sympathy. They were the sharp intakes of neighbors who were finally, openly entertained. I stayed seated, calm as ever. With all due respect, I said, my voice steady and clear enough to cut through the tension, I simply reinforced my property after repeated vandalism, which I documented, including... I held up my phone. This, I tapped play. The footage projected onto the clubhouse TV. Crystal clear. Karen's SUV swerving, the hedge crunching, the glorious bang of two tires blowing out in unison. A few neighbors couldn't hold back laughter. Karen's face went redder than her brake lights. You can't show that. This is harassment. The HOA president swallowed hard, then looked at her with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Exhaustion. Karen, we've received multiple complaints. We have witnesses. And now we have video evidence. This is unacceptable behavior. No, she screamed. He is unacceptable. He's a menace. Karen. The HOA rep from that day interrupted sharply. Enough. That word again. It hit her like a hammer. Her mouth snapped shut. The room stayed quiet for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, from the back, a voice spoke. I think she should be removed from the board, another voice joined. Seconded. And just like that, a tidal wave of agreement swept the room. People who had suffered her letters, her fines, her smirks, they were done. Karen stood there, trembling, eyes glistening, not with apology, but with disbelief. She had ruled this neighborhood for years, and now, with a single vote, her throne was gone. The HOA president cleared his throat. Motion carried, effective immediately, Karen is removed from the HOA board. A murmur of satisfaction rippled through the room. Someone clapped. Another laughed quietly. Karen spun toward me, her face a mask of hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. I just leaned back in my chair, calm and unshaken. Karen, I said softly, for you, it is. Karen didn't leave the clubhouse that night the way she had entered. She'd arrived like a queen on trial, ready to point fingers and issue decrees. But she left like a shadow, storming through the double doors with the brittle dignity of someone who had just watched her kingdom crumble beneath her heels. The murmurs in the room followed her all the way to the parking lot. Someone laughed under their breath. Someone else muttered, "Good riddance." I watched through the window as she climbed into her wounded SUV, the spare tire wobbly, the hood still scratched from the hedge. She slammed the door and sat there. For a long moment, hands gripping the wheel, shoulders shaking. For a second, I wondered if she might cry. But Karen wasn't built for tears. She was built for rage. The very next morning, the fallout began. I opened my blinds to see her pacing, Her driveway, phone in hand, gesturing wildly to some poor soul on the other end. Even from across the street, I could read her lips. Lawsuit, sabotage, criminal. She gestured toward my hedge like she was pointing at a mortal enemy. I took a sip of my coffee and just watched the performance. Hours later, an unmarked car pulled up. A man in khakis and a tucked-in polo stepped out, clipboard in hand. Insurance. I leaned on my porch railing as he and Karen circled her SUV. He bent down to inspect the shredded tires, the scratched undercarriage, the fluid leak that still stained the driveway. He took pictures, made notes, and then I saw it. He pointed to the road, he pointed to the hedge. Then, with a look of someone who had seen this exact scenario too many times, he turned to Karen and shook his head. Her voice rose, her arms flailed. She stomped one heel so hard I thought it might snap, but it didn't matter. The man calmly handed her a brochure, likely about safe driving or policy exclusions, and got back in his car. She was still yelling as he drove away. The neighborhood was watching, behind curtains, from porches. Everyone saw the queen fall, and everyone saw that she had no army left to protect her. Over the next week, her humiliation spread like wildfire. The video I'd given to the HOA became the talk of the block. Whispers of, "Did you hear about Karen's car?" and "She finally got what she deserved," floated through the evening air. Neighbors who had avoided me for months now waved when I walked by. Mr. Callahan even brought me a slice of his wife's pie. "For services rendered," he said with a grin. Karen, meanwhile, became a ghost. She drove slower now, sticking to the middle of the road like a student driver. She avoided eye contact, her sunglasses bigger than ever, as if hiding behind tinted glass could erase her shame. But avoidance wasn't enough. The real collapse began when the HOA board followed through on their vote. Without her influence, the floodgates opened. Homeowners who had been silent for years stepped forward. Stories spilled out like a broken dam. She fined me $100 for my recycling bin being out an hour early. She told me to repaint my shutters, twice, because she didn't like the color. She made my daughter cry over a lemonade stand. The board launched a formal review. And within weeks, Karen wasn't just off the board. She was officially censured. Her warnings and petty fines were overturned. Neighbors she had lorded over for years now walked past her house with their heads high, some even smiling. At the irony, and for Karen, the walls kept closing in. Her SUV was still in the shop. Rumor had it the damage was in the thousands. The insurance company, armed with my video, was refusing to cover it. Driver negligence, they'd said. She was on the hook for everything. The woman who once strutted down the street with power in every step now hurried from car to door, like a fugitive. Packages piled on her porch. Her yard, once pristine under her own obsessive eye, started to show signs of neglect. A few weeds sprouted by her mailbox. Her roses drooped. The queen had abandoned her crown. One evening, just after sunset, I saw her standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, staring at my hedge. It was whole again, vibrant and green, a monument to survival and quiet vengeance. For a moment, our eyes met across the street. There was no smirk this time, no condescension, just a look I couldn't quite name. Was it regret? Or just the bitterness of someone who finally realized the world had stopped spinning for her? She turned and went inside without a word, and that was the moment I knew. Karen wasn't just losing her car, her power, or her reputation. She was losing the one thing she'd always craved the most: control. The days after that strange evening felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the heavy, unsettled quiet that follows a storm. The neighborhood had changed, and so had Karen. I barely saw her anymore. No more strutting down the street with a clipboard. No more click of heels announcing her reign. Instead, her curtains stayed drawn, and her driveway sat empty for hours at a time, except for the occasional delivery truck that seemed to leave more boxes than she could carry inside alone. People whispered, "She's thinking about selling." I heard the insurance denied her claim. I bet she can't even show her face at the next meeting. And as much as I tried to stay detached, I felt a strange weight in my chest. Not guilt exactly, because I hadn't done anything wrong, but a kind of melancholy. Watching someone who had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist slowly shrink into herself felt like seeing a monument crumble. But then I would step onto my porch, look at my hedge, lush, green, thriving, and remember every tire track, every smirk, every condescending laugh that said your peace doesn't matter to me. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was balance. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't leave without a fight. One Thursday afternoon, I got my proof. I heard the knock first. 3 sharp raps, like someone trying to remind me they belonged here. I opened the door to find Karen standing, there holding a stack of papers and wearing the forced smile of someone trying to bargain with fate. "We need to talk," she said. I leaned against the doorframe. "Do we?" She shoved the papers into my hands. "I'm giving you one last chance to make this right before I involve my lawyer." I glanced at the first page. A notice of intent to sue, typed in bold letters she'd clearly printed. Off some generic legal template. "Karen," I said softly, "you don't want to do this." Her mask slipped for a moment, revealing the desperation underneath. "You've ruined my life," she hissed. "My car, my board seat, my reputation. People are laughing at me." I let the silence stretch just long enough to feel like a verdict. "Karen, people aren't laughing because of me. They're laughing because of you. You did this. To yourself." Her jaw trembled. For the first time, I thought I saw tears threaten at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, straightened her shoulders, and stormed off my porch without another word. 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. It was almost anticlimactic. No fireworks, no dramatic scene. Just a white post hammered into the ground, a little red tag swinging in the breeze. "Coming soon," the neighborhood noticed. Of course they did. People paused during their evening walks, glanced at the sign, and traded knowing looks. Nobody cheered. Nobody gloated. But the energy shifted again, lighter this time, like a pressure valve had been released. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt free. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to vanish into her own house. I saw glimpses through the window when I went out for my mail, boxes stacking higher, rooms slowly emptying. Her once perfect roses started to wilt. The lawn that she had once weaponized against everyone else went a little patchy. She was unraveling, and the strangest thing was, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt done. The last time I saw her up close was a Sunday morning. I was on my porch sipping coffee when she dragged a suitcase to the curb, waiting for a moving van. She paused, staring at my hedge one last time. The sunlight caught her face, and for a moment I saw something different. Not rage, not arrogance, but weariness. She looked smaller somehow. Her lips moved like she might say something, but in the end she just turned away. And that was when I realized the truth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't rage or shouting or even clever traps. Sometimes it's just outlasting someone. The moving van came on a quiet Thursday morning. I was already on my porch with my coffee, watching the sunlight stretch across the street, when I heard the low rumble of the engine. It parked in front of Karen's house, and 2 men hopped out. Glancing at the neatly stacked boxes by her garage, it felt surreal. For months, she'd been a storm that lived right across the street, a force that sucked the air out of the neighborhood, leaving everyone else bracing for the next gust of trouble. And now, just like that, she was packing herself into a moving van and rolling away. I watched her step out, heels clicking on the driveway. Even now, she tried to hold herself like a queen. Her posture was stiff, her sunglasses in place, her chin tilted just enough to suggest she was untouchable. But I saw the cracks. Her house, once immaculate, looked tired. The roses in her yard had wilted to brown edges. The lawn she'd once demanded perfection from had sprouted patches of yellow. And behind her glasses, I could sense the weight of defeat. She supervised the movers, snapping instructions that no one seemed to take seriously. One of them actually rolled his eyes when she turned her back. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some pretending to water plants, others openly watching. No one said goodbye. No one waved. And that, I realized, was the truest sign of her fall. She'd arrived years ago. She made herself the center of this neighborhood. People whispered her name with annoyance, yes, but also a kind of fear. She controlled the board. She controlled the letters. She controlled the mood of the entire street, but now she was leaving in silence. The only sound was the thump of boxes sliding into the truck and the occasional clatter of something fragile breaking. Not that I suspected she'd admit it. I stayed on my porch, quiet, calm, watching the last act of a long, exhausting play. Then, at one point, she looked over. Our eyes met across the street. No smirk this time, no condescension. Just a long, silent acknowledgement that the game was over. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. I just held her gaze for a moment, then raised my coffee in the smallest of nods. She hesitated. Then, to my surprise, gave the faintest nod back, and, without a word, she turned, climbed into the SUV, fresh tires but still faintly scarred from its encounter with my Hedge, and followed the moving truck down the street. The cul-de-sac exhaled. The moment she was gone, the neighborhood felt new. Birdsong drifted from the trees. A breeze rolled across the hedges, my Hedge standing tall and whole, a vibrant green monument to patience and quiet justice. I walked down the steps and ran my hand across the leaves. Smooth, soft, untouched. For the first time since I'd moved here, my home felt truly mine. No more letters in my mailbox. No more tire tracks in my lawn. No more living under the shadow of someone else's control. The street began to come alive again. Mr. Callahan came out with his morning paper and gave me a thumbs up. Mrs. Calloway walked her little dog past my house and smiled like the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Across the cul-de-sac, two neighbors I'd barely spoken to before were chatting by the mailboxes, laughing softly. It was as if the entire neighborhood had decided collectively to breathe again. And as for me, I realized something in that quiet morning light. Revenge hadn't been about the Hedge. Not really. It had been about reclaiming my peace, about drawing a line and saying, this is my home, this is my life, and I won't let someone trample it, literally or otherwise. I thought about all those long nights at my kitchen table, all the anger and frustration, all the times I'd wondered if I should just give in and let her win. And I thought about that single perfect moment, the crunch of tires, the burst of air, the wide-eyed look of shock when entitlement finally met consequences. It wasn't just justice. It was a lesson. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't shout or fight or throw punches. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait. Wait, prepare, and let people write the ending to their own story. I took a deep breath, letting the warm air fill my chest, and smiled. The Hedge swayed gently in the breeze. Karen was gone, and peace, real, unshakable peace, had finally come home.